Smoke 'em if you got 'em, it's Waterworld on Virtual Boy Works. The short and unhappy life of the Virtual Boy resulted in it becoming one of the most decidedly oddball relics in video game history. Commercially speaking, it's a colossal failure from a company defined by consistent success. As we've seen with Jack Brothers and Panic Bomber, Nintendo's attachment to the Virtual Boy meant that many of the company's most reliable partners leapt into the market sight unseen. Those publishers quickly came to regret it, but not before Virtual Boy owners got a few spin-offs of major game franchises. Virtual Boy also ended up with a remarkable legacy of more or less completed games that ended up being shelved once the red-tinted writing of failure began to manifest on the pitch-black walls of reality. And then there was Waterworld. Waterworld was not the only media tie-in title developed for Virtual Boy, but it was the only one released in the US. It's the counterpart, in a sense, for the Gundam game that made it to market in Japan. We'll talk about that one in due time, but as for Waterworld, well, it's honestly hard to imagine a more fitting media license being attached to Virtual Boy, really. The biggest cinematic disaster of 1995, released for the biggest video game flop of the year. The only thing that might have even come close would have been, I don't know, a Theodore Rex game for Sega 32X. That didn't happen though, while Waterworld for Virtual Boy definitely is a real thing. The Hollywood equivalent of Virtual Boy, Waterworld was a tentpole summer 1995 release whose ambition was matched only by misguided clumsiness. And like Virtual Boy, it flopped hard both critically and at the box office, and has widely been regarded as one of the worst things ever to emerge from its medium. Waterworld derailed the upward career ascent of lead actor Kevin Costner, just as Virtual Boy was a huge wipeout for designer Gunpei Yokoi. And like Virtual Boy, Waterworld wasn't actually as completely horrible as lazy downward-punching hate jokes would have you believe. I mean, the movie Waterworld wasn't especially good, but like the Virtual Boy, there's a bit there to admire if you can get past the misguided hubris it radiates. In a world where the DC cinematic universe exists, you can easily see how much worse a grand sci-fi epic can be than Waterworld. At least Costner's mess of a movie was driven by personal passion. That said though, when you put Waterworld and Virtual Boy together, the results are definitely not pretty. In another example of this game's terrible synchronicity, Waterworld comes to us from none other than Ocean. I mean, sure, it's an iffy Western-developed licensed game based on a 90s movie property. Who else was going to make it besides Ocean? But this is a game based on a film in which climate change has melted the polar ice caps and submerged the world beneath infinite water. Of course it's developed by Ocean. Who else was it going to be? As a result, Waterworld actually has a kind of interesting pedigree. According to Moby Games, its two lead programmers, Jason Plum and Steve Wada, were former Sega Technical Institute staff who have some Sonic credits under their belts. Unfortunately, Sonic's magic doesn't seem to have rubbed off on this project, which feels very much like the sort of slight and half-formed venture you tend to find in the early days of a new hardware platform. It's not even that Waterworld is bad exactly, more that it plays like a first draft. The core idea behind the game isn't really that shabby. It feels much like a latter-day attempt to capture the spirit of an early 80s arcade game. In that sense, it feels almost like a spiritual companion to the Robotron-esque Jack Brothers. Almost. You might describe Waterworld as a hybrid of Asteroids and Defender and Robotron, although it's nowhere near as successful as any of those coin-op titans. Since this is, Virtual Boy, Waterworld attempts to add a 3D element to the action. Imagine if Asteroids, with its 360-degree free-spinning shooting action, brought the game camera in close and placed it right behind the player's ship. To put it in terms of its contemporary releases, the visual effect Waterworld uses to create this sensation of 3D might remind you of the title screen to Yoshi's Island, which rotated flat sprites around a central pivot to create the impression of a spinning pop-up storybook. Waterworld lacks the fairy tale whimsy of Yoshi's Island, obviously, but it puts the same effect to use here, as the core of its gameplay. As you make your way around the ocean, debris and enemies and civilians spin and scale around the ocean's surface to create a crude impression of maneuvering through 3D space. It's a pretty stark-looking game, as the ocean and sky alike appear as solid black, separated only by a thin horizon line. As was the style at the time, pretty much everything here is presented as pre-rendered sprites. The parallax effects on objects works okay, but with its bleak design and chugging frame rate, it's difficult to call this an impressive looking game in any sense. The visuals are stark, and the effect of red-tinted people floating bisected on the water's jet black surface makes for a profoundly grim-looking game. Honestly, the grayscale visuals of this direct feed capture don't quite convey how bleak the world of Waterworld truly is. Oh, there we go. So here you play as Costner's character, the Mariner, trying to protect drowning civilians from being abducted by smokers, the diabolical thugs led by Dennis Hopper's fanatical Deacon. Rather than focus on the film's core quest-based storyline in which a girl's tattoo leads to the mythical last scrap of dry land left on Earth, Waterworld on Virtual Boy is just a simple shoot-'em-up. The girl with the Dryland tattoo, Enola, does appear as a character here, but not in any real capacity. She's just one of the characters bobbing along in the water. Preventing Enola from being captured rewards you with a stacking bonus multiplier after each stage, whereas allowing her to be captured causes the bonus to reset and Dennis Hopper to shake his head in disappointment. The problem is that there's no real way to know which identical Atoller sprite moving choppily across the water is Enola. This whole element is basically down to blind luck. The enemy attackers, the smokers, move lazily across the screen as you putter around trying to protect the innocents. Compared Waterworld to Defender, and in fact, this is exactly correct. Smokers can grab the Atollers and will attempt to escape from the combat arena. They even flash like mutants in Defender once they've grabbed one. Yes, I know this takes place on a vast and open swath of ocean, but there are invisible walls all around the action to keep you hemmed in. So yes, it's an arena. Basically, there are two outcomes to a round. You destroy all the hostile smokers, or you allow all the Atollers to be abducted. You clear out the Atollers, you move to a new wave of action, and enemies move a bit more aggressively and throw new threats into the mix. If you screw up and let all the good guys get captured, though, you'll move to a survival round in which a vast fleet of enemy speedboats comes after you. If you somehow manage to survive this stage, you're rewarded with moving along to the next stage. And that's pretty much the extent of it. Waterworld has a few other gameplay factors that show up, like some extremely dangerous Atoller-seeking sharks that might remind you of Joust's pterodactyl. But it doesn't become any more complex than that. There's something kind of sad about Waterworld. Despite being one of the easiest targets imaginable, it's a game about Waterworld on Virtual Boy. It's not the worst game ever made. The creators clearly had Golden Age arcade classics in mind as they created it, and the 3D effect works well enough. It's just a profoundly mediocre work. It feels half-finished. I mean, it's one of the few Virtual Boy games to offer any sort of multiplayer, but it manages to accommodate up to 9 players by alternating turns. If, for some reason, you and 8 other people want to take turns sticking your face into the body-heated warmth of a shared Virtual Boy visor. Yuck. Virtual Boy was the only console to see a Waterworld-based game in the US. There was a more ambitious PC game released a few years later for some reason, and a Super NES game made its way to Europe. But both the Genesis and Sega Saturn games never quite surfaced in any region. So all of this makes this another unique release for Virtual Boy, though it's not exactly one to brag about. Next time on Virtual Boy Works, the console's other US release based on a licensed media property, sort of.